Welcome to Horseshoe Politics. Today is September 12th, 2020, and I didn't really have a video planned out for today, so I just thought that I would just make a video talking about all the recent poll results that have come out in the last few days, and talking about what this means for not only the presidential race, but also the state of the Senate race. So let's talk about the polls that came out yesterday and today, September 11th, September 12th, and then we'll move on to polls released a couple days earlier, because there were a whole bunch of polls released on September 9th, especially, that we can talk about after these polls from today and yesterday. So let's start with today's polls, September 12th, 2020, which is a Saturday, obviously. Let's talk about these polls first. So today's polls that were released today, they're all coming from a bunch of different swing states, and they're all by either New York Times slash Siena or Gravis. So we're gonna just move down the list, starting from the New Hampshire poll. So this poll shows Biden at 45% and Trump at 42%. So that means that Biden's up by 3 points in the most recent poll over Trump. And I would expect this to be somewhat close to the actual election day results. In 2016, Hillary Clinton narrowly edged out a win in New Hampshire against Trump. It was by like a 1%-ish margin, if not less. And Trump almost won in New Hampshire. But in 2020, Biden is expected to do better than Hillary in general across the country. So it would make sense that Biden gets around 3% above Trump. Next, we're moving down to Nevada. Nevada is a similar case. Biden's up by 4 points over Trump in this poll. And in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton was up against Trump in the actual election by around 4-ish points. So it would make sense if Biden won Nevada by around 4 to 5 points this election. I don't think Nevada is going to flip Republican. I think that's out of the question because Hillary was still able to win Nevada by quite a bit, and Biden's likely going to do better than Hillary Clinton in Nevada. So Biden should be able to win Nevada for sure. Arizona's an interesting case because that's a state that voted for Clinton in 2016, not Clinton, Trump in 2016, but a lot of people are expecting it to flip from Republicans to Democrats. People are expecting it to flip from red to blue, meaning that it would vote for Biden in this election. And a lot of polls actually have Biden up against Trump, but obviously polls in individual states can't be too trusted because not that many polls are done in each individual state, so usually on election night, the actual results are a few points off from what the poll results predicted. In the general election, though, the general election polls, those are a different story. In the 2016 election, everyone was talking about how the polls didn't predict Trump's victory, but if you really look at the poll results from the 2016 election, specifically the polls that were released right before the election, they were really not that far off at all. They were really pretty close to the actual results. Because in the actual election, Hillary Clinton actually won the popular vote by around 3 million votes, which is about 1 to 2% above Trump. And that's exactly what the polls were showing right before the actual election, Clinton winning by 1 to 2 percentage points. So even though Clinton won the popular vote, obviously because of the Electoral College, Trump won the actual election, despite Hillary Clinton winning the popular vote. And that's the thing about these general election polls. They don't really have any say on the actual election. They just give a general picture of how the two candidates are doing. Because the national election is not a popular vote election, it's an electoral college vote election. So the actual number of votes that each candidate gets throughout the country doesn't really matter much. But it's just a good indication of how candidates are doing. Next, we'll move to Wisconsin. Wisconsin, Biden's up by 5 points. Now, this is a state that Biden needs to win if he wants to win the entire election. It's a state that historically voted for Democrats, but now flipped to Trump in 2016. But Biden, a lot of people are predicting he's going to win that state back, but we just have to wait and see. Minnesota, Trump up by 9 points. Not Trump, Biden's up by 9 points. Trump is down by 9 points. That is really interesting because in 2016, Clinton barely edged out a win in Minnesota. And Biden's up by 9 points in this poll, which means that Biden definitely is doing better than Clinton, especially in Minnesota. Now we're looking at two Senate seat results from the polls. Arizona Senate seat, Kelly, the Democratic candidate, up by 5 on McSally. So Mark Kelly is probably going to win this seat against McSally. In 2018, the Democrat Kirsten Sinema won the Senate seat. So in 2020, the Democrats are probably also going to win the Senate seat. Same thing with Minnesota. It's likely going to be a Democratic win. The thing about states like Minnesota and Michigan is, even though they're swing states in the actual general election, in the Senate elections, they're usually a lot less close. Usually Democrats easily win. Now let's talk about polls from September 11th, yesterday. So yesterday, a North Carolina poll came out from Rasmussen, and Trump is up by 2 points in North Carolina. Now, North Carolina has recently voted for Republicans in 2012 and 2016. Both elections, North Carolina went towards the Republican. Even in 2012, when Obama won by quite a bit, North Carolina voted for Mitt Romney. So it's not surprising that Trump is still up in North Carolina, but it's still possible for Biden to win North Carolina, even though Trump's currently up. Next is another Wisconsin poll. Biden had 51% of the vote, while Trump only had 44% of the vote. So in this poll, Wisconsin has Biden up by 7, even though in today's poll, he's only up by 5. Both of these polls reflect a different story than what actually happened in 2016, because in 2016, the polls showed Hillary Clinton expected to win these states, but in reality, Trump won those states. So it'll be interesting to see if the polls are accurate to what actually happens on election day. Next is an Indiana poll. Obviously, Biden's down by quite a bit. Trump is up by quite a lot. Indiana, the last time I voted for a Democrat was in 2008 for Obama, but that was a rare occasion. So it's almost certainly going to be won by Trump. Oregon, Biden's up by quite a lot. That's not at all surprising. Oregon traditionally votes heavily in favor of Democrats. Now we have the North Carolina Senate seat. Now this Senate race is going to be quite important because this is a Senate seat that Democrats definitely need if they want to get a majority in the Senate. So this Senate race is going to matter quite a lot in terms of which party owns the Senate. So right now, Cunningham is up by 3. Even though Tillis, the Republican, is the incumbent, Cunningham is still able to do better than him in a lot of the polls. And apparently, Cunningham is also doing better than Tillis on money, on raising funds. So I would not be surprised if Cunningham won this election. And it's also a Senate seat that Democrats definitely need in order to have a majority in the Senate. Okay, now we will talk about polls from September 9th and September 10th. So first, let's start with polls from 2 days ago, September 10th, 2020. So this day has a few polls from Monmouth, Rasmussen, and a Sooner poll. So first poll on this list is the general election poll from Monmouth, and Biden's up by 7 points, which has been around what Biden has been averaging above Trump in the general election polls, which is definitely better than what Hillary Clinton was averaging around this time 4 years ago. Next, you have another general election poll from Monmouth, but this one's pretty interesting because this one, instead of only having the main two candidates, it also has Green Party candidate uh, Howie Hawkins and Libertarian candidate Joe Jorgensen. I'm sorry about this, but some of the pictures cut off. It couldn't all fit in frame, but just know that Joe Jorgensen got 1%, Howie Hawkins got 1%. But what matters is Biden got 7 points above Trump. Next is Michigan, Trump versus Biden. Biden's up by 8 points, which is completely different from what happened in the actual 2016 election with Trump winning that state. So if Biden's able to keep that several point lead in these swing states such as Michigan and Wisconsin, Biden can easily win the election. Next is another Michigan Senate poll where, no surprise, you have the Democrat up by several points above the Republican. And then, interestingly enough, you have a congressional poll for Oklahoma. And this appears to be a swing state, not swing state, swing district, because the both candidates are polling pretty similarly. So I have not heard of either of these candidates, but I guess what you guys should keep in mind is that Oklahoma's 5th district is going to be a swing district based on this poll. Now let's go to September 9th's polls because there's a lot of polls on this day, so I won't have much time to go into depth with each one of them, but I'll just basically be summarizing the results. So Biden versus Trump in Wisconsin by Marquette, Biden up by 4. So Wisconsin, Biden's up in most polls, but Trump might still win that state if it goes like 2016. But Hillary Clinton didn't do as well back then as Biden's doing now. So Biden might still be able to win all those swing states. Also, you have 2 polls that were taken in Florida with Trump versus Biden, and both of them, interestingly enough, have Biden up by 3 points. One 50 to 47, the other 49 to 46. So what'll be interesting about Florida is that it has quite a few electoral votes, and it could easily decide the election, kind of like in 2000. But Trump recently moved to Florida, and Florida has Republican governor, both Republican senators. So Trump might still be able to win this state, even though Biden in general has been doing quite a bit better than Clinton did in 2016. But keep in mind, Biden does not need Florida to still win the election. He just needs to flip the Rust Belt back to the Democrats. All Biden needs is to win back Michigan, was Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. That's all Biden needs to win the election against Trump. He doesn't need Florida, but Florida would be an added bonus. If he wins Florida, he only needs one other state to win back. But now let's move on to the other polls from September 9th, and keep in mind, there's a lot of them. Okay, now let's move to the long list of polls that were taken on September 9th. By the way, one of the polls was cut out at the bottom. I literally could not fit them all on this screen. So just know that one of them was Oklahoma's Senate race with Jim Inhofe, the Republican senator, up by many, many points. It's Oklahoma. It's not surprising that Republicans do very well against the Democrats in that state, but let's talk about the polls that are on screen now. North Carolina, Trump versus Biden. Biden's up by 2 points, 49 to 47. That's just like what the other polls showed. Arizona, Trump versus Biden. Biden up by 4. Arizona could very well go to Biden. Wisconsin and Michigan both have Biden up by 6. Keep in mind though, all these polls that I just listed, they're all by CNBC/Change Research, but notice the Democrat symbol D in parentheses, which means that these polls might be skewed towards the Democrats, so keep that in mind when interpreting these poll results. Same thing with the Pennsylvania poll, has Biden up by 4, but it also is by a Democratic leaning polling company, so keep that in mind. But the thing about Pennsylvania is that it's Biden's home state. Like, he's never actually served there. He doesn't really have strong connections to that place. But, like, one thing about that state is that that's where he was born. Even though he's from Delaware as a senator, obviously. But that might affect the election results a little bit in Pennsylvania. That might help Biden out a bit. The fact that he was born in Pennsylvania. But let's move on now. Another poll came out from Pennsylvania on September 9th. But this one has Biden up by 9, which is quite a lot. I don't think Biden's going to win by 9 points in the actual election. If he could very well win Pennsylvania, but it's not going to be by 9 points most likely. I think this one is an outlier. Same thing with the Minnesota poll having Biden up by 9. I think Biden can definitely win by like 5 to 6 in Minnesota, best case scenario. I don't think 9 points is going to happen though with any of the Rust Belt states. Oklahoma, Trump up by 25. Oklahoma is a strong conservative state. This is no surprise at all. Oklahoma voted heavily for Trump in 2016, and it's going to do the same in 2020, most likely. Now we have a few more general election polls from a few different companies. One of them has Biden up by 2 from Rasmussen. One of them has Biden up by 6 by CNBC. That's the one with the Democrat symbol by its name. And then Hill Harris X has Biden up by 8. So all these polls have Biden up by quite a bit. Trump rarely wins the general election polls, but that doesn't matter because the Electoral College can still play to his advantage. Now you have another poll by Reuters that has Biden up by 12, which I think is an outlier. I am highly certain that Biden's not going to win the general election by 12 points in the popular vote. I think best case scenario, he'll win the popular vote by maybe 6 percentage points, 6 to 7, but 12 is definitely, almost certainly not going to happen. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that, but usually it's very rare for a presidential candidate to win a popular vote by more than 10 points. Usually there's a set 40% of the country that votes Democrat no matter what, another set 40% that votes Republican no matter what, and then there's the middle 20% who are swing voters. Usually you're not going to have any candidate, any of the major two candidates get less than 40% in any election no matter what's going on, because you have around 40% of the population that votes for one party in most circumstances, and then another 40% vote for the other candidate in most circumstances, except for extreme circumstances, obviously. But then you have the middle 20% that are the swing voters. So that's why you're never going to have two one-sided elections that are that one-sided in one way or another. It's just the fact that that's how polarized the country is. But let's move on to the rest of the polls on this list. Another poll has both Joe Jorgensen and Howie Hawkins listed. In this poll, Joe Jorgensen got 3% of the vote and Howie Hawkins got 2% of the vote, meaning that 5% of the people in this poll voted for a third-party candidate. Now, that means that the third-party candidates could actually potentially influence the outcome of the election, but usually third-party candidates don't have that big of an impact, so we'll have to see. But Green Party voters, they would mostly vote for Democrats or stay out of the election if Howie Hawkins was not running. But for Joe Jorgensen, I feel like it's a bit more of a split. Some libertarians lean more towards Democrats, some more towards Republicans. A lot of them don't like either party, so they would likely stay at home for both third-party candidates if neither of them were running. Now you have a few Senate polls here listed besides the Oklahoma one that didn't have enough space to fit on this list because there were too many polls on September 9th, but all these polls have Democrats up by a few points, which means that Democrats actually have a chance of winning the Senate. So Democrats need North Carolina, they need Arizona, they need to keep Michigan and Minnesota. But those polls all have the Democrats up, so Democrats could still win the Senate. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you tune in tomorrow. I'll see you then. Bye.